that's fine.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Chairperson, I've also muted you. Can you please unmute? I'm sorry, Chair, I had to mute everyone else because I couldn't locate who was speaking.
Okay,
Sorry,
it was Imam. Can we step to item number 4 and hand over to Parliamentary Budget Office? You have maximum of 35 minutes. That's the maximum for presentation. Over to you.
Okay, just before you go, Chairperson, I just want to double check. You did not make a mistake. You deliberately want us to start with PPO before going to FFC.
Sorry, it should be FFC first. Sorry, thank you for that alert, Lubabalo. FFC, it's over to you. Maximum time, 35 minutes.
Thank you, Chairperson, and good morning to all the honourable members. I will just make a few remarks about the medium-term budget policy statement, particularly focused on the division of revenue. And the first is that if you look at how the division of revenue evolves over the next 3 years as proposed, it's clear that the biggest hit in terms of budget allocations will be impacted on national government, because the budget allocations of national government relative to the budget of 2019 will fall in nominal terms over the next 3 years. So even before we start thinking about inflation, there are significant falls over the medium term in the budgets of national departments. This reflects the mandate that national departments have in terms of budgets. And that mandate is largely located in the criminal justice system and defense. So the criminal justice system, which includes the law courts, the law enforcement agencies, the police, the prisons, will all see significant cuts to their budget over the next 3 years. And this is the most, the proposals made by Treasury, by the Minister of Finance, clearly locate the burden of adjustment very strongly on national departments, because they have negative growth in their budgets. Their budgets decline in rand terms, in simple rand terms, over the next 3 years. So the next biggest burden of adjustment will be felt by the provincial component of the division of revenue. And provinces will see their budgets increase in nominal terms, in rand, simple rand terms. Their budgets will increase, but far, far below inflation. So if inflation over the next 3 years or 4 years is slated at or projected to be around 4%, somewhere there, we will see budgets of provincial government over the next 3 years growing only by 1% or 1.5%. That growth in the provincial sphere is very, very much concentrated on conditional grants. So the equitable share is growing at 1% or less, whereas provincial conditional grants will be growing somewhere in the region of 3.5%. Both are below inflation increases, but the burden falls much more squarely on the equitable share. And the point we made last time is that this reflects a double burden being placed on public consumption. Public consumption, which is in the main health and education in the provincial sphere, and the criminal justice system in the national sphere. That is what public consumption largely consists of. And these budgets are all being forced down both to reach, to stabilize debt, but also to shift the composition of spending from public consumption to what is called capital. So the local government sphere is the least, or sees its budgets increase most strongly over the next 3 years. And the local equitable share in particular continues to grow far, far higher than inflation. At about 9, well, it's slowing dramatically over the next 3 years. But in the first couple of years, it's growing 8 or 9%, and then the third year it falls. And provincial, the growth rate of the local equitable share is very robust, but slowing dramatically. The growth rate of local conditional grants is also below inflation, but it's growing increasingly rapidly. So this picture of the local equitable share or the local sphere of government, seeing its allocation coming from the division of revenue increase at a very rapid rate compared to the other spheres of government is not only reflective of this budget, but has been the case for quite a long time. But despite this increase in resources allocated through the division of revenue, local government is clearly facing a fiscal crisis. And we can see this in a variety of ways. If you look at the Auditor General's MFMA report for 2018, if you look at the top 10 contributors to unauthorized expenditure, all of them relate to overspending on the budget. And certainly, as the Auditor General has raised, and as many people continue to raise, there are serious financial management challenges at local government that need to be addressed. But on the other hand, when you overspend on your budget, one could, and that's a repeated pattern, one could see this as a financial management problem, but one could also see it as a fiscal problem. The top 10 contributors in the Auditor General's report to fruitless and wasteful expenditure, I think almost all of them, there may be one, I may be missing one, but the top 9 at least, are all about interest payments to Eskom, which are fruitless and wasteful. Because the way we define things, if you accumulate a debt unnecessarily, and then you have to pay interest on that debt, that is fruitless and wasteful expenditure. So the point is that, again, this might relate to issues of financial management, but it is strongly indicative of a crisis, a fiscal crisis at local government. And I just wanted to make 3 points about how we might think about resolving that crisis before handing over to my colleagues. And there's essentially 3 ways that fiscal crisis at local government could be resolved. I mean, the first is to give local government additional resources through increasing taxation. So we say that there's an unfunded mandate at local government. In other words, local government has obligations that it is unable to finance. And in order to finance them, we could raise taxes. And of course, those taxes could either be raised at national level or at local level. There's a huge amount of debate that could take place about that in order to fund the unfunded mandate. The second way we could address the problem is to shift resources from national and provincial departments to local government. So we keep taxes as they are, and we shift the division of revenue. And if we were to do that, what we would probably be doing is shifting the unfunded mandate from local government to national and provincial government, because of course national and provincial government also has a mandate. It's to provide education, healthcare, and criminal justice services. So if we shift the money away from those things to local government, we may ease the unfunded mandate at local government, but we would raise the unfunded mandate at national government. A third way of resolving the problem would be to reduce the obligations on local government. In other words, reduce the package of public services that local government funds. And if we do not take seriously the fiscal crisis in local government, and if we do not take seriously the need to make choices, clear policy choices about the path, the fiscal path in the period ahead and its implications for policy, if we fail to make those choices, the likelihood is that it is the third solution that we will find emerging most strongly in the years ahead. So with that, I would hand over to my colleagues from the research department of the FFC to take you through the elements of the presentation. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Deputy Chairperson. I like the energy.
Good morning, Honorable Chair and members, chairs. And as the most recent data series showed, due to the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown, GDP contracted in Q2, that is quarter-on-quarter movement of last year of Q2 and this year of Q2 by 16.5%. Financial indicator of the inflation rates year-on-year average remained relatively low and stable, albeit in the headline. Core inflation, on the other hand, as we've mentioned in a previous briefing, might be a different story that we need to watch out for. Although the official unemployment rate dropped from 29% to 23.3% in the second quarter, this, however, was due to the fact that people were unable to engage in job search during the lockdown, resulting in a mass increase of the economically inactive population by 5.2 million individuals in the second quarter of 2020. As a result, currently, there are more people of the working age, that is between 16 and 64 years, who are economically inactive. So there are more people not economically active than the labor force itself, as inequality and poverty deepens. This graph shows the provincial decomposition of the labor market movement in terms of the 2.2 million in total employment losses. The blue bars added up, you'll get that 2.2 million people that lost jobs just in that one quarter and two. And the 5.2 million, which I mentioned earlier, in the total increase in economically inactive population, the green bars here added up together. The patterns of employment, unemployment, and economically inactive population change suggests that there is a potential rural-urban divide in terms of economic performance impacting the labor market, our foundational inputs markets, right, of labor due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown. More specifically, areas where there are high population densities and economic concentration suffered more job losses than rural areas in terms of quantum. In Gauteng, for example, here, Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal alone, more than 1 million jobs, employment that were lost, and that with the economic lockdown, more than 1.2 million individuals became economically inactive in a single quarter in these provinces. It is important to remember that South Africa's fiscal performance weakened before even this new amendment to the budgets and the onset of the pandemic, and it is set to deteriorate even more substantially over the medium term in gross debt to GDP ratio, as our acting chairperson has mentioned, caused by the sharp rise in primary deficit at 9.8% of GDP that needed financing, which incurs more debt and debt service costs at 4.8% of GDP for 2021. The plan or hope here as in terms of the projections here in the MTBPS, is that despite the 7.8% contraction in the real GDP this year, the economy will hopefully quickly recover to 3.3% growth next year to taper to cover the primary deficits and carry the debt burden and all the associated costs there. The Commission reads that the government's economic plan for recovery is to forge a social partnership to boost confidence, restart the economy, and conduct urgent reforms as per the 2019 strategy document by Treasury, with focus areas of infrastructure, expanding energy generation capacity, creating mass public employment, and supporting rapid industrialization, as also the President announced. In this regard, although the Commission appreciates the plan, this plan of MTBPS to be strengthening the continuity and consistency of the position taken, in line with even FFC 21-22 annual submission for the divisional revenue table at this Parliament, especially specifically Chapter 3. However, we would like to note as a Commission that consistency should not be confused with repetitions, tedious repetitions without proof of real reforms, impacts, and outcomes. For it may even lose us even more credibility of policy and that of implementation capability of government programs. For instance, the assumed recovery shock at 3.3% just after the negative real GDP rate of 7.8% for the 2020 financial year seems extremely optimistic, given historical trends. So, and even with that, added to that, gross fixed capital formation or investment, which is one of the fundamental factors for both the current and medium-term growth rates, had decelerated even before, as I mentioned, the onset of COVID and lockdown. And moreover, and related, the electricity availability factor remained unstable despite that demand decreased during the economic lockdown, causes concerns when you take all that together in terms of the credibility of the assumptions for infrastructure-led growth and growth prospects, and the feasibility and viability of the economic recovery plan itself. And finally then, the Commission would also like to reiterate, as stated in the 21-22 annual submission for the divisional revenue, Chapter 3, Recommendation 2, the Commission is convinced and in agreement with government that after reviewing the economic situation leading up to the COVID-19 crisis, that a fundamental structural transformation of the economy is inevitable. Therefore, the Ministers of Finance, of Economic Development and Trade and Industry, and that of Labour should jointly address these economic barriers, social inequality and polarization by adopting what we call the localized product value chain approach towards economic recovery. This means that hard conditions, especially should set upon the grant frameworks at the provincial and the local level to permit procurement of goods and services and products only if they are assembled locally, originates locally within the South African borders to stimulate the domestic economy and encourage local job growth. I hand over to my colleague, Sasha Peters.
How much time is left, Honorable Buthelezi, for the 35 minutes for FFC? Okay, you can go on. He'll indicate to me.
Good morning, Chair, members of the committee and other colleagues. I'll take you through the next few slides, which focuses first on the consolidated fiscal framework before honing in on the intergovernmental transfers to provinces. So this slide and the table on it illustrates the fiscal framework, and it focuses specifically on the period 2020-21 up until 23-24. And it shows the components of the fiscal framework as at the time of budget 2020, the revised figures as per the supplementary adjustment budget in June, and then the figures tabled recently with the 2020 MTBPS. Now, if we focus on the adjustments to the fiscal framework between the time of the supplementary adjustment budget relative to what we saw now with the MTBPS, there are three key things to note. The first is that the MTBPS has attempted to slightly ease the consolidation path set out in June with the tabling of the supplementary adjustment budget. So if you look at the main budget expenditure figures, you will see that at the time of the supplementary adjustment budget, 1.76 trillion was projected for 2021-22. And with the MTBPS, this has increased to 1.8 trillion. So an injection of about 37 billion there. Similarly, for 2022-23, main budget expenditure was projected at 1.8 trillion at the time of the supplementary adjustment budget, and MTBPS has increased that projection by 66 billion, taking it to 1.92 trillion. So the second aspect to note is that the bulk of those increases in main budget expenditure go to non-interest spending, so the spending that gets allocated in respect of service delivery. But, and this is the third aspect we'd like to highlight, we also see debt service costs increasing. And as we know, increases in this item serves to crowd out other more important types of spending. If we move to the next slide, please. The table on this slide, slide 11, shows the year-on-year growth in a few components, namely non-interest expenditure, payments for capital assets, and consolidated expenditure. And just 2 points to emphasize here. The first is that despite the additions to main budget expenditure, which we saw in the previous slide, and which effectively increases non-interest spending, when you look at the year-on-year growth rates, there are significant cuts of around 2.8% projected for non-interest spending for the next financial year, 2021-22. And members will see that highlighted there in the column shaded in green. Alongside this, we see capital spending projected to grow strongly by 13.4% next year, 2021-22. Thus indicating a clear prioritization or protection of capital spending. And this then seems to be, this is in line with government's intention to rely on investment in infrastructure to kickstart growth. Chen, if we can please move to slide 14. We now turn to an overview of the provincial fiscal framework, specifically the intergovernmental transfers to provinces in the form of the Provincial Equitable Share, or PES, and conditional grants. So at the top of slide 14, it shows the equitable share and conditional grant allocations to provinces over the next 3 years, starting from 2021-22 up until 2023-24. And if we look at the bit shaded in grey, you'll see that for next year, 2021-22, provinces are allocated 629.4 billion. And of that, the bulk, or 514 billion, is in respect of the equitable share allocations, while 18%, or 115.4 billion, is conditional grant allocations. Now, the figure at the bottom of the slide shows the real year-on-year changes in these components. And if we focus specifically on 2021-22, there are two aspects to note. The first is that overall intergovernmental transfers to provinces are set to decline by 4% in real terms next year. And this decline is being driven predominantly by your reductions in the PES allocation. And the PES is set to decline by 5.5% in real terms next year. The second aspect to note is that alongside this decline in the PES, we see real growth of 2.7% projected for provincial conditional grant allocations. Now, together, these trends indicate an attempt to shift spending towards capital, and this is because capital infrastructure development is generally funded through conditional grant funding to subnational governments. Now, for the Commission, the plans to cut the PES are of particular concern, given the role of the PES in funding the delivery of key basic services, such as your basic education, healthcare, and social welfare services. So that is in brief, the picture that provinces will be facing. Chair, just to note and apologize that there were a few slides that were included in the presentation sent to the committee on provincial conditional grants. Those were mistakenly included. We do not as yet have detailed information on the provincial conditional grants. So with your permission, I'll hand over to my colleague, Dr. Mube, to take you through the local government allocations. Thank you.
Co-Chairperson Buthelezi. Honorable
Yes.
Buthelezi, how
Yes,
much time
yes.
left so that we can advise well?
Still have got about 8 minutes, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Over back to you, FFC.
Thank you, Chair. And let me proceed to the slides on local government issues. And we have a few slides on local government issues. And as has been pointed out by Commissioner Sachs, the local government is facing a number of crises, including the fiscal crisis. Many municipalities are distressed and dysfunctional. And we see that that trend has been deteriorating over the past few years. So the Commission implores government to prioritize local government, especially since there are poor households which the sector caters for. The Commission cannot overemphasize the point that the allocation to municipalities must also be used efficiently and effectively because of the cuts which we are going to see in the next slide. So it is important that resources to the sector should be used efficiently and effectively. And the sector is set to receive a total allocation of 434 billion over the 21 MTF. And the allocation is less by 17.7 billion from what was announced in the February budget. Next slide. This slide shows the allocations to the local government, the division of revenue, the amount which goes to the local government and how it has been shaping over time. We see on the left-hand side at the top, we have local government allocations. What is important in this particular slide or that particular graph is that if we compare the allocations from the 2020 budget and the 2020 MTPPS, we see that there is some divergence, which to us is a very, very important thing, that what was promised in the 2020 budget and the MTPPS, they diverge, which means that it becomes difficult for the sector to plan if there are such variations in what is on paper and what is on what was promised in the 2020 budget and on the MTPPS. And if we look at on the right-hand side, we see the real growth rates, which really is up and down, which means it's less predictable now for the sector if the transfers are moving in this particular direction and up and down like this. And this has some implications on planning for the sector. And in the long run, this may actually be a cause of dysfunctionality in the sector because it is difficult to plan ahead when transfers are less predictable. So we're saying over this period, local government total allocation is set to increase by about 2.1% in real terms, as has been pointed out. In nominal terms, it is less than inflation. And the Commission notes the proposed reductions in the total allocation to the local government, but remains concerned about the implications of these reductions, especially in next year, 21. These reductions may have some implications on service delivery. Next slide. Then in the next slide, we look at the local government equitable share and conditional grants. We see in that particular graph the reductions in conditional grants in the current year, but next year, as Commissioner Sachs has pointed out, there will be an increase in conditional grants. But on the LES, we see a decline next year. So there is a severe decline, almost 10%, about 9% in nominal terms. And that will have some implications on service delivery, even if all the efficiencies in the sector are exploited. In the bottom graphs there, we see the real growth rates in the local government equitable share. The trend over time has been declining, which is really concerning. Although in 2021, that red bar there really is the highlight, that which the LAS has been protected over time, but next year we see a decline, which, as I pointed out, will have some implications on service delivery. Whilst the conditional grants on the graph on the right is set to increase next year, and that's the trade-off we're talking about, that there seems to be a movement away from consumption spending to capital spending, which, as we pointed out last time, that it is important that government should not really abandon consumption spending, because that's the mandate of government. Next slide. This next slide simply summarizes what we have said, that we are concerned about the effects of the reductions on service delivery, especially considering that electricity charges and water charges may actually go up, and this something has to give in, and that will be service delivery. Then local government conditional grants will be reduced, were reduced in the supplementary budget by about 3.7 billion, and they are going to increase next year, which is welcome. Then the Commission is also concerned that reprioritization of resources from the local government is meant to actually fund the SOEs, which is really a concern, because the local government is under a fiscal crisis or under stress. So for resources to be prioritized from this particular sector to fund SOEs is really taking away from the poor to fund the well-to-do. And also one concern is the repeated baseline cuts, which will have some negative effects on service delivery. We have seen a number of years that baseline of different conditional grants have been cut, and this will actually affect infrastructure investment, especially repairs and maintenance. And it is important that before any cuts are done, there must be an assessment of the implications of such cuts. Next slide. Then the next slides, my colleague Edi Rakabe will take you to through the last slides. Thank you.
Thank you, Nkululi. The next set of slides is really just two key points to note here. It's about the wage bill. So the main thing here is that the wage bill remains the biggest risk to the provincial fiscal sustainability. And this is especially important because many of the provincial delivery mandates are labor intensive. So despite the fact that the minister or the National Treasury or government is actually projecting that the wage bill is going to decline over the next FGEF.
FFC, can you open your video, please?
Yes, Chair. My video is on, Chair. My video is on, Chairperson. Okay. Yeah, so it was just to note that to make the honorable members aware that the absence of despite the fact that the government projects that the wage bill is projected to decline over the next medium-term expenditure framework, the absence of the wage agreement for this particular financial year and also going forward remains a really biggest fiscal risk to the sustainability of provincial budgets. And with the cuts that has been proposed, should there be an agreement which is above or that is almost related to inflation, we're almost likely to see a double reduction on the provincial budget if the outcome of the negotiations obviously turn out to otherwise from what the Minister of Finance have already announced. Go to the next slide, Chen, which speaks to the next slide, Chen. So sorry, I've already spoken to the wage bill because I'm worried about the time. So I'll just go to the next point, which speak about the COVID-19 relief. Yeah, here, members, is the point to note here, which the Commission's next slide, which the Commission notes is the slow uptake of the economic relief package, as well as the maladministration that we've seen associated with some of the instruments that were announced by government as part of the economic relief package. So essentially here, the concern is that we've had this 500 billion that was announced, huge amount of money in order to cushion the economy against the economic downturn from the economic downturn. But what has happened here, what we see is that there's been slow uptake. If you look at the business loan guarantee scheme, for example, the number of applications that we received relative to the number of applications that are approved is very small. The next point to note here is that during the supplementary budget, there was a 20 billion which was reprioritized away from the conditional grants from the provincial equitable share formula. Now, with the cuts that were announced, so what we're likely to see is that there's going to be a double blow on the departments from which that the adjustment for health reprioritization took place. So essentially, which means that with the reductions that were announced again, that some of the departments which are mostly non-social services related are going to see a huge reduction on their budget, which again it means that there will be serious impact on service delivery. The point to note again on local government, there was a 20 billion relief announced for local government. The only point here that we really like to raise is that of the 20 billion that was announced, we only see 11 billion that was made available to local government. Therefore, the Commission recommends that government also invest in reporting system to ensure accurate and timely monitoring of the budget. So the main concern here is that we really struggling with data, performance data, to measure the impact of the economic relief package. So in the absence of that data, we cannot really say whether the 500 billion relief package which government has announced has had an impact, because we don't have the information. Lastly, Chairperson, is just to look at the linkage between the budget and the some of the economic interventions that were announced. And next slide, Chair. Next slide, Chair. The next set of slides, we really try to look at the alignment of the budget to the economic policy intervention that was announced. We know that the President announced the economic reconstruction recovery program lately, but the point that we really like to drive here is that in order to improve the fiscal multiplier, government needs to improve better alignment between the budget and the policy intervention. And this we need to see in the way in which cuts are being carried out, as well as the adjustments which have here we're just indicating the extent of the
they said they moved everything. Is it not true?
Extent of the expenditure.
Really?
Whoever is behind, please mute, except for FFC presenter. Mute all of us.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yeah, the slide here, just we look at the expenditure trajectory of some of the key departments which are really would be responsible for the which are driving the economic recovery plan. And what we see here is really mixed result of expenditure pattern, especially in some of the departments which are really crucial for economic recovery, such as your agriculture and human settlement. But what we also see on the other side is that the Department of Small Business Development, we've seen extensive expenditure increase on their part, especially perhaps linked to the fact that they've been driving some of the small business intervention associated with the relief package. Lastly, Chairperson, we looked at the proposal which was made by the minister relating to zero-based budgeting, if it's really would be able to improve spending efficiencies. But really the point the Commission would like to make there is that ZBB cannot be implemented overnight. So we really cannot be moving from incremental budget from ZBB without the macro reorganization of government. So there are certain things that needs to be done before we can move to ZBB. As much as it is possible for ZBB to allocate funding to improve efficiencies through ZBB. Our point, the Commission's concern is that we really need to exercise caution before, especially because it really needs really very capable staff. And what we find is that currently some of the municipalities are even struggling to implement their budget in time, to develop their budget in time. So to move into such a system which is really data intensive would really be extreme, and therefore caution should be exercised. Chairperson, I think this is the end of the presentation. I'll ask the Deputy Chair Michael Sachs to conclude. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, conscious of time, Chair, I hand back to you. Thank you.
Conscious of time, who's that? I think
back, sir. I'm just handing back to you, Chair.
You also consumed your injury time, and I've been lenient because these things that you're talking about and you dealt with us, you managed us because your last presentation was talking to local government, and I allowed you to consume your injury time. Thank you very much for the presentation, and I hope members have highlighted issues that they want to follow up on. Can I now hand over to PBO? We'll go to discussions after the two presentations. Thank you. PBO, 35 minutes maximum, please.
Thank you, Honourable Chairperson and Honourable members. So I'm Nelia Orlandi, and I will take you through the PBO's presentation this morning. The focus of this presentation is on the National Adjustments Appropriations and the Adjusted Division of Revenue only. The purpose of the presentation is to stimulate discussion on the content of the adjustments budget, which provides for the unforeseen and unavoidable expenditure, the appropriation of monies already announced during the tabling of the annual budget, including the reductions in the COE that was announced, the shifting of funds between and within the votes where a function is transferred, or the utilization of savings, but there's a restriction of 8% in terms of shifts. The rollover of unspent funds from the preceding financial year. So members, the current year revisions are mainly based on the COVID-19 fiscal impact, the support to the SOCs, the revisions to baselines to stabilize debt and reduce the budget balance. And the presentation will further aim to highlight points for discussion when members consider the adjusted budget. Next slide. So this table summarizes the entire adjusted national budget. In the main budget for 2020, appropriations by vote amounted to 963 billion. That was now increased in the adjusted appropriations to 1,025 billion. These increases include rollovers of 1.6 billion, significant and unforeseen and unavoidable expenditure of 24.5 billion that was already allocated during the supplementary budget. And then unforeseen and unavoidable expenditure amounts to 12.9 billion. Expenditure earmarked in the 2020 budget amounts for 22 billion. And then there's also self-financing expenditure of 1.5 billion, and 187 million has been declared unspent funds. Expenditure from the direct charges against the National Revenue Fund was estimated at 805.7 billion. That has now been reduced in the adjusted budget to 782.5 billion. These direct charges includes the reduction of COE for the president, members, judges and magistrates, and that contributes 211.5 million. Debt service cost was increased by 7.2 billion in the first supplementary budget, but now it's been reduced again by 3.5 billion. In terms of Section 70 of the PFMA, payments are now due for the Land Bank and the South African Express Airways. And then the budget for the sector education training were reduced from 19.4 billion in the original budget to 10.2 billion now in the adjusted appropriations. Next slide. So the table continues, members, with provisional allocations made in the 2020 budget that was not assigned to votes. Now it's been allocated as 7 billion rand in the adjusted budget. Provisional allocations for Eskom restructuring, provision has been made and it's now been allocated in this budget. The compensation of employees has been reduced by 37.8 billion. The contingency reserve of 5 billion has also now been allocated, and then national government is still projecting an under expenditure of 2 billion for the end of this financial year. Then in terms of the main budget revenue, it was adjusted from 1.397 trillion rand to 1.097 trillion in this adjusted budget, and together with the rise in the expenditure, it culminates into a budget balance of minus 707 billion. Next slide. So just in terms of the adjustments per vote, specifically to fund SAA, some of the bigger amounts that were taken from departments are from basic education, 275 million rand. Higher education contributes 1,133 million. Health, 694 million, and correctional services, 308 million. The police is the biggest one that contributes 1,196 million rand, human settlements 345, and transport 681 million towards the funding for the SAA. Next slide. The net effect of adjustments made to compensation budgets are mainly in international relations. There was a reduction of almost 200 million. Higher education and training, compensation budget reduces by 536 million. And then correctional services, the compensation budget reduces by 1,269 million rand. Defense reduces by 956 million rand. And Independent Police Investigation Directorate, the actual reduction was initially 1,927 million rand, but this department moved some of their savings in the goods and services budget towards COE, so the net effect is only an increase of 309,000 rand. The police COE budget reduced by 4,965 million. So members, the table is there, so you can go through all the other reductions. So we can move to the next slide. So members, only 2 departments declared unspent funds during this adjusted budget. The first one is Public Works and Infrastructure. They declared 181 million rand unspent, of which the main proportion comes from the property management trading entity, and that amounts to 161 million rand. The next vote that also declared unspent funds is Employment and Labour of 6 million rand. And also to note, members, this vote, Employment and Labour, also did a virement or made a shift from compensation of employees to pay for claims against the state of 350,000 rand. And this shift can only be approved by Parliament in terms of the adjustments. Next slide. In terms of unforeseen and unavoidable, the unforeseen and unavoidable expenditure are mainly for the presidential employment interventions. From the 19 billion that was not allocated during the special adjustments budget, you will see the National Treasury received 7.49 billion rand, of which the biggest proportion, almost 7 billion, is allocated towards the Education Employment Initiative. Social development received 6.9 billion rand, and the biggest proportion of that allocation is for the extension of the social relief of distress grant for the next 3 months. Agriculture, land reform and rural development receives an additional allocation for food relief of 1 billion rand, and environment, forestry and fisheries also receives additional funds of 1.9 billion for job creation. So most of these allocations are for job creation in these different votes. Next slide. So members, in most departments, virements and shifts were made from savings in goods and services to computers or computer services during the COVID period, and then savings on vacant positions were shifted to households for literacy. And the table below only highlight shifts to 4 departments. The first one is public works. You can see there where savings were on mainly goods and services, and for machinery and equipment, it was moved towards the Independent Development Fund. And also to note within this vote, the shift or the virement was more than 8%. The virement in Prestige Policy Program was actually 29.3%, and this shift can only be approved by Parliament as well. In terms of basic education, savings on the specifically appropriated school infrastructure backlog grant has been shifted towards computers, audit costs, travel and subsistence, teaching toolkits, and the Funza Lusaka information management system. This is also a shift or a virement that can only be approved by Parliament because the grant was specifically appropriated for school infrastructure. Next slide. So we continue with the virements. In terms of vote 25, justice, savings on transfers to households has now been shifted for vehicle licenses and TV licenses, which is basically a shift from transfers to goods and services. And then a saving on capital expenditure for buildings has been shifted towards the Zondo Commission, the 63 million rand. In terms of transport, capital spending, savings on capital spendings on the rolling stock fleet renewal program and savings on capital spending for signaling has been shifted towards PRASA for operational expenditure and also towards Airports Company South Africa. And then various other shifts or savings in various other transfers has been shifted towards the Civil Aviation Authority, 155 million. And then there was also a reclassification of transfers to households towards a once-off payment for taxi gratuity of 1.1 billion rand. Also in this vote, in transport, the virements exceeded the 8%. The rail transport action program transferred 17.6% of the original budget, which is also one of those items that needs Parliament's approval. Next slide, please. So now we move to the division of revenue members. So in terms of the national level, the national allocation has been increased from 1.15 trillion to 1.199 trillion in the current budget from the main budget. Provincial equitable share has been reduced by 17.7 billion rand, and then the local government equitable share has been increased by 11 billion, but that was already done in the first adjustments budget that was tabled. So also to note, the national share includes the conditional grant allocations, the general fuel levy, debt service cost, as well as the contingency reserve that was allocated now in the adjusted budget. Changes to provincial allocations include additional allocations to support the Presidential Employment Initiative, addition for assistance with food relief, and reductions to the wage bill. Next slide. Just in terms of a bit of more detail, members, in terms of the change to the provincial equitable share, there was reductions of 25.2 billion as part of the reduction of the 37.8 billion to the growth of the public service wage bill. So what this is saying is that the reduction was 25.3 billion just on provincial COE. 7 billion was added for the presidential employment initiative, and then 500 billion was added for public food relief. Next slide. So members, this is the detail of the changes to provincial government conditional grants, and this includes reductions of 56 million to the National Tertiary Services Grant. There was a 14 million reduction in the Community Library Services. Comprehensive Agriculture Support Program is also being reduced. 52 million is taken from the Health Facility Revitalization Grant. 5 million was taken from the Elima Project Grant. 918,000 was taken from the Land Care Program. The Mass Participation and Sport Development Program has also been reduced. 42 million has been taken from the National Health Insurance Grant, and 37 million is reduced from the Title Deeds Restoration Grant. 240 million has been reduced from the National Health Insurance Indirect Grant that hasn't been spent. 273 million has been reduced from the Provincial Emergency Housing Grant. And then in terms of the School Infrastructure Backlogs Grant has been increased by 138 million rand, and the Statutory Human Resource Training and Development Grant increases by 155 million rand. And then there was also an increase for the HIV, TB, malaria and community outreach program for 11 million rand. This is just on the provincial government conditional grants. The next slide shows the changes to the local government conditional grants, and this includes rollovers of 390 million, specifically for the Urban Settlement Development Grant in the Nelson Mandela Bay Metro. 98 million for the Public Transport Network Grant, also for the Nelson Mandela Bay municipality, and there was a rollover of 307 million for the Regional Bulk Infrastructure Grant for drought and COVID-19 water and sanitation interventions nationwide. So what these rollovers mean is that the expenditure didn't happen in the previous financial year, and Treasury approved the rollover to the current financial year. There was also additional allocation for water services infrastructure of 12 million. And then there was a few reductions. 4 million was reduced from the Integrated City Development Grant, a reduction of 2 million from the Infrastructure Skills Development Grant, 2 million from the Infrastructure Skills Development Grant, 12 million from the Integrated Urban Development Grant, 180 million from the Municipal Infrastructure Grant, and then 12 million was taken from the Neighborhood Development Partnership Grant. 253 million was taken from the Public Transport Network Grant, but the net effect was 154 million because of the rollover there was only a net reduction of 154 million. In terms of the Water Services Infrastructure Grant, there was a reduction of 78 million rand, and 18 million was taken from the Integrated National Electrification Program to Eskom, and 55 million is taken from the Regional Bulk Infrastructure Grant. Next slide. So yes, members, just to summarize what I've just said is that appropriations per vote has been increased by 37.7 billion from 963 billion in the 2020 budget to 1,025 billion in the new adjusted appropriations. Direct charges against the National Revenue Fund has been reduced by 22 billion, and other provisional allocations were now appropriated, which result in a net increase from 1,766 billion in the estimates of national expenditure to 1,806 billion in the adjusted appropriations. In terms of the main budget revenue, there was a reduction from 1,397 billion in the original revenue budget to 1,098 billion in the adjusted appropriations, which together with the additional expenditure resulted in an estimated budget shortfall of 707 billion. In terms of the variants and shifts between main divisions or a program, are also allowed during this adjusted budget process. And then we have identified the ones that can only be approved by Parliament. In terms of the adjustments, also affected the division of revenue, which is now appropriated in the following manner. National Sphere is receiving 51%, and it was originally estimated for 49% of the total share. And then provincial government is now receiving 39.9% of the total allocation, which is a reduction of from the 42%, and local government receives 8.9% in the adjusted budget of the total allocations. Thank you, members.
Thank you. Is there someone who's going to continue with the presentation? Or is it only you, colleague?
It's only,
are you the only one presenting?
I'm the only one presenting. The additional slides is just for information purposes. It's basically detail on what is in the main presentation, members.
Okay, thank you very much. That was very economic of you. The language understood well by Honorable Co-Chairperson Shenge. Honorable members, I think these two briefs or presentations by both the FFC and PBO, it's just paving a way for us and making us to be able to raise possible critical questions in as far as the MTBPS process is concerned and the division of revenue, more especially on the cuts from the departments. We have attentively listening. When I'm saying this, I'm giving you an opportunity, honorable members, to raise your hands through the icon that we know or management. The two secretariat from Standing Committee and Select Committee will assist me in identifying those who want to be recognized. So, honorable members, we are being empowered by these two presentations so that we can be able to unpack and raise critical issues in as far as this process is concerned. Any other hands? Any hands that has been raised?
Hello, Chairperson.
Yes.
So far, there are 4 hands: Honorable Molezane, Honorable Njatu, Honorable Lachmanarian, Honorable Konzo, and Honorable Tikhale.
The third one, I didn't hear you.
Okay, Chairperson, it was Honorable Njatu, Honorable Molezane, Honorable Lachmanarian, Honorable Konzo, Honorable Tikhale, Honorable Kaiso.
Mohale.
And Joseph, please, thank you.
Tikhale, Chairperson.
Oh, okay. Merkhale Likai.
Joseph, please, Chairperson.
Okay. And then Kaiso. You said so, ne? And Honorable Joseph.
Yes, Chairperson, Honorable Joseph.
Okay. Thank you very much, honorable members. We'll start with you, Honorable Moletsani. And please remember, don't forget to switch on your videos.
Thank you, Chair. On the presentation of FFC, I've heard Mr. Michael talking about in order to control shifting of funds from the province and national to local government. My intake there is that I think it will work more proper if we can do away about the middleman. Rather than shifting some funding from the province, maybe it's high time that they need to look into that they must do away with the province. And then the money must come from the national straight to the local government, so that the local government can be able to handle its challenges. Secondly, my concern is about the shifting of funds, the 14 million that has been reduced from the Letsema. At the present moment, there's a serious crisis from the farmers who are complaining, who are facing the problem of drought. And now, instead of the money to be there to assist them in state, now they are reducing that money from those farms. And we know the important role that is supposed to be played by the farms in order to produce food. So I just wish that they must take note of that. Thank you for now, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Mletsani. Honorable Njatu.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members. Chair, my focus will be on two items. The first one, Chair, there's a huge outcry on the definition of bailout. So I would want to understand that FFC and PPO to give us a definition of a bailout package for SOEs. And also, how can this be correctly classified? Because there's a huge outcry in terms of the terminology on bailout. So if one could get a definition which will clarify this matter. Then the second question, Chair, will be on the cuts or reduced of funds from the national departments. So my question, Chair, is that what specific criteria was used to move or reduce these funds? So one would want to understand, because there's a long list of reductions. So what is the specific criteria? Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Honorable Mohita. My Chair.
Thank you, Chair. My apologies for the video. I have indicated that we are busy with by-elections. Chair, but from my side, I also concur with the previous speaker in respect of reductions. We are seeing a lot of reductions, mostly in our economic cluster, whereas social cluster is getting more increases. Now, my question would be, the reductions, did we not take into consideration the economic development, our recovery plan in respect of job creation when we made those reductions? And from Mpumalanga province, I think we are quite dissatisfied when it comes to public works. You know, Mpumalanga, we are mostly dealing with coal. This is a lot of stress on our public works department in respect of the provincial roads, which is already in such bad condition. Thank you, Chair. I'm covered.
Thank you very much, Honorable Moita. Medical.
Thank you very much. Hello? Thank you very much, Chairperson. I have a question on the slide that we're talking to reigniting the economy on the reconstruction and recovery plan. I see they have a plan whereby they are saying they're going to engage with the Minister of Finance, Economic Development and Trade and International Relations, and even Labor. So my question, I don't know whether it will be a question or what, but it must be a question, Chairperson, that when they do the presentation with the ministers, did the minister, I don't know whether they've already done it or they're still going to do it. Will you assist me? My request was that they must make sure that these ministers work in relation with the leaders that are on the ground, the leaders that are seeing the people who are not employed, the leaders that are always with the people when they have problems, like when they have funerals and they don't have money to continue with the preparations, they will always visit these leaders on the traditional leaders specifically. Let me just say that, and they will always assist these families. So my request was that when they do this plan of theirs, they must just make sure that they talk with them, arrange with them, because they know specific people who are doing this project. I know that in the rural areas, we are always disadvantaged. These people are not being contacted and they are suffering, Mama. Just remember a woman who will be not working, who is a widow, who is living with grandchildren, and she can't even maybe assist them with a fund to the crèches. What will happen to them? But if they work with the traditional leaders, they'll show them the real people that they must assist. And lastly, I have seen the slide of the PBO whereby they are talking about the adjustment of vote. I want to specifically talk to the Department of Education or talk about it. Hey, Chairperson, we have a problem in our primary schools as I speak at the moment. The contractors on the site worked with the talisman, and the talisman took their toilets to the schools, and the Department of Education did not pay the toilets. As I speak at the moment, those people, the owner of the toilets, they removed their toilets at the schools, and now the children are not going to school, and tomorrow is Thursday. They are supposed to start with their examinations. So it won't work because they cannot go to school. There are no toilets. They were having those toilets that were not in good condition, and they were advised to do away with them. So now it's a problem, Mama. It's just a problem. I don't know whether my talks is in relation with the presentation, but you will assist me. I know you are a mother. Thank you very much.
You are muted, Chair.
Sorry, I think every question is important in here, as long as it relates to the quality of service that we need to give to the people, because we have a responsibility of making sure that we oversee the public purse. So the other thing, as you are talking about the issue of the primary schools in your area or somewhere in Limpopo, I think I'm thinking of what the session that we had with the Minister of Basic Education, and I think the over and above what you're doing, we are allowed as members, irrespective of that area being within our constituency operation, we are allowed to write to the MEC so that they can quickly attend to the issue. And if we don't get the joy from the responses of the MEC in the area, we can elevate the matter to the minister. The sooner we do it, the better. because the kids are starting with the examinations, even if they are not a matriculants. But that is a health hazard. What you're talking to us, and we must take it serious. Thank you about that, and I think the presenters and other members will talk to the issue. Very important issues that we have raised. Honorable Kaiso, Whip.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. And thanks for the presentation from the PBO and FFC. Chair, I do think that with the presentation and what was presented to before this committee, especially around a number of areas of reduction and across the departments, it does call for the committee to interact with these departments to really get a further detailed understanding to their role in as far as the department themselves, so that we're able to can determine or detect the level of engagement with the department when these reductions were done. I think we should be able to have meeting with these affected departments. For instance, the worrying factors that is on the issue of a key service delivery department, such as a local government department, which the presentation does tell us that the trend there has been deteriorating, and that we as a committee need to prioritize it. Now, with this drastic cuts, it means seriously there has to be, a further engagement with some of these critical departments at the service delivery point, including your national health, in particular national health insurance implementation, because it's very critical, and also have a better in-depth understanding with those particular departments. So I also want to get from the PBO, FFC, the issue there that the FFC is warning us is around the issues of a reduction in the service delivery. And when we talk about service delivery, immediately what comes into one's mind is the poor people on the ground. When we specifically refer to issues of charges on water and electricity, which means they are mostly going to be affected by that. That needs our intervention. That at least in the process of developing this or management of this, the poor people should not be adversely affected. That's one's understanding. In no way that because it will mean we'll be talking this and moving in a particular direction which does not favor the poor. So it needs a closer look, this matter, because it really will affect the poor who are the majority in the country. So now, as well as the issue of the infrastructure grant, because the president has made announcement around the issue of the infrastructure development being part, because if we talk about infrastructure development, obviously we're talking about something, perhaps second to, first to or second to the development of the economy, because key things will develop from that particular angle of infrastructure development. So anything that has to do with the cut in that, it has a bearing on what already has been announced, in as far as economic recovery is concerned. So it's one area that we as a committee have to talk around it and ensure that it does not have that impact in as far as their economic recovery plan is concerned. Now, what I want to understand from the FFC is the area on the performance data. I just want to understand what is the issue of the Treasury in terms of providing data in terms of performance around the issue of 500 billion. I don't really do not get it. I just want to understand that. And also, lastly, maybe to sum up, is on the issue of, I've talked about the issue of school infrastructure. You know, I went to one school in Botshabelo called Khoratudu. It has got almost over 30 years. And when you look at the infrastructure of that school, you know, it's really bleeds one's heart that such a high school with a good performance, especially around maths, it will look like that whilst we are going to have a situation of this type where now the infrastructure to education and learning is going to be in this proposed manner. So now I want to get to understand from what was announced from the presidential or announcement in as far as economic recovery plan is concerned. The president has announced, job opportunities that amounts to, for instance, around 300,000 teacher assistants job opportunities and many other job opportunities. How does FFC figure that out of the whole process now? In as far as the budget announcement are concerned, how do we feel? Because I only got the issue of area of expanding or extending the 350 grants to the situation covered by COVID. But I also want to get to understand how does it covers the other announcement of job opportunities created, announced by the president. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Kaiso. Honorable Josephs.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you for the
yes.
to FFC and Parliament Budget Office. Just one or two comments and then a question. I would like just to the equitable share point, raise the point of equitable share to local government, and I think maybe there is a reason for us to revisit, because local government in itself, with the economic crisis, seems to me it's the hardest hit out of the situation. And while we think still that they have avenues of collection of money within the municipalities on tariffs, it is not the same as it was 20, 30 years ago, with the economy and the ability of people to pay. And I think the issue raised by Mr. Sachs about the options that he gave us, the additional resources to the unfunded mandates. I just want to ask him, because he also raised the point about the AG's reports, unauthorized expenditure and overspending. If you shift money to a sphere of government that has a record of AG, what the AG report shows, then is it not a risk? Is it not irresponsible to do that? In principle, it is a good thing, but where we are now, is that the right thing to do? Should we not just deal with local government first in terms of accountability, leadership, management, good governance, and then move towards what you're suggesting? I'm just worried that if we do it now, we increase the risk. Secondly, I support the resources, shifting to local government from national or province. But I think with my EFF colleague in this committee who made a proposal, I want to say that in the Western Cape, where I worked for 5 years, there's 80,000 people working for the Western Cape government. So I don't know how many people is working for the other provinces. So it's not just a straightforward decision to close shop on provincial structures. There's a couple of million people working there. The issue is that national government should act like our committees act, an overarching responsibility as to what happens in a province or in local government. So that's where the money should be, closer to the people, structures closest on the ground. That is my thinking. But the principle, I think you are talking about rethinking is right, the member of the EFF. But I think the overarching structure that is where national must review. The reduction should be there. And then my question, Chairperson, and I agree with the unfunded mandates raised by Mr. Sachs. This is an old age problem. We need to address this, shifting that responsibility back to province or national. And it ties in what Mr. Sachs said, the decline of the conditional grants as raised by the Parliament Budget Office. 569 million over the medium term is a concern. My question is, if this money is taken away in the proposed DORA process and it's not used by these departments or projects, will they shift the money back to the provinces where the money's been taken away from? Or will National Treasury just keep the money even if that money is not fully utilized? The intention is to take away now. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much. Honorable Karim, the last one.
Person, I just, given that we've just come back, Chairperson, as you know, from an NCOP provincial week and elections are looming next year, if all goes well. Obviously, local governments higher upmost the minds of NCOP delegates, and also I'm sure the NA MPs. So I just wanted to ask very quickly. So, you know, the FFC says that we have these unfunded mandates, that it's not financial management problem, it's a fiscal problem. I think they mean it's both. I mean, it's obviously both, but it's fundamentally, it's a fiscal problem. The MEC in our province, KZN, 2 weeks ago described it as a structural problem. Now, you know, Dr. Michael Sachs knows also well, as a former Treasury official, that these issues have been on the agenda for a very long time. Now, there was a wonderful, I remember, report done by a team of local government experts who were also quite politically sussed. In 2007, I think, or 2008, calling for a review of the powers and functions of all three spheres of government, but also in particular, they addressed the issue of local government powers and functions and how this is not commensurate with the fiscal policy. And, you know, there hasn't been the political will or even, you know, enough of a commitment to look seriously at these issues since at least 2007. It's now 13 years later, we're still discussing the same issues. Those of us who were in the local government sphere in Parliament, who were responsible for, as a committee, the legislation that gave effect to the new model of local government, very shortly, Chairperson, after the December 2000 elections, we began, like I think about 2003, 2004, partly with Salga's constant harping on this, to raise these issues, what is called now the fiscal challenge. And so nothing's really been done. So the first issue one raises with the FFC is, what makes you think something can happen now? How can you help us as parliamentarians to ensure that this issue is put back firmly on the agenda? So I also think, Chairperson, if the majority in the committee agree, we could ask the FFC to do some work in this regard. We could ask the PBO to do some work in this regard. Because I think perhaps we in the NCOP, really, that's a big issue for us because of our role. And maybe we can get this thing going and then work with the NA committee and the COCTA committees in both houses to deal with this matter. Otherwise, we're going to be back in the same old situation, even after next year's elections. No matter how good a caliber of MPs you put there. If they put you and Comrade Sifiso Buthelezi, leave me out. I'm too old now, and my days are like my last term. Hopefully, if I survive it, right? So you young people who have got a lot of experience, right? Trade unionist here, chair of the finance committee, appropriations committee, Sifiso with his chairperson Buthelezi with his economics background. Imagine, ask the FFC, he'll be perfect to be a mayor. So you know, even with all of you there, it's not going to change things. It's a structural stroke, what FFC calls fiscal framework challenge. Thank you. So we need to address it. So on our side, I'm saying, Chairperson, what we should do is commit that they're not going to do a document for us now, contemporary, a contemporary one, a new one with a new verb and a new drive, taking into account there's no will by the powers that be. But we also powers that be. I mean, we have power, Parliament is sovereign, and we can do our, but and on our side as NCOP, and with our colleagues from the NA say, no, we're together cocktail, we're going to do something with this report. We're going to fight to change things, but we don't have the technical expertise that the PBO and FFC have. They can help us in that regard. Thank you, Comrade Chair.
Thank you, Comrade Yunus Karim. Maybe I need to put it on record that what Comrade Karim is claiming, that he is older. He might be older to most of the members here, but not me. And I'll hand over now to request Honorable Co-Chairperson to make a comment. Before you, Honorable Co-Chairperson, I see the hand by Lubabalo. Maybe there's someone else who wants to speak.
Yes, Chairperson, two more members, Honorable Nkondlo, and then Honorable Chairperson Buthelezi. Chairperson, thanks.
Okay, Honorable Nkondlo.
Thank you, Chairperson. My one's Chair, I'm going to try and be quick. I understand based on both presentations that we're sitting with a very difficult challenge, very tricky to say the least when one listens at both presentations and considering where we are in terms of our economic climate. Now, I think following from Honorable Karim, I would think more than a question, I'm actually more convinced by what he's saying, that maybe some work needs to be done and proposed from this level. Because I wanted to ask, what are those bold structural reforms that are needed to back up this recovery plan? Because indeed, we can't keep on doing the same thing and expect different results. Because at this point, when I listen actually to the issue of the ZBB, that is the zero-based budgeting, my mind, I think, was triggered of the gender-based budgeting, which even itself, you know, we have been debating and getting to a point where we realize that, you know, its implementation becomes a challenge on its own. And once again, even the ZBB is being mentioned at this point. Perhaps we may need to do some work in that regard of what should be those structural reforms, so that we rather, as Parliament, consider making such proposals other than, you know, always posing questions and getting answers. And then secondly, Chair, I think in relation to the issue of the fiscal health of municipalities and the current decrease to LES, I think for me, it's once again another tricky balance. And the question once again in that regard is that, you know, what becomes, what must offset the other? Because we agree, and I think we've been concerned, having joined some of the committee discussions, you know, about the fiscal health of the municipalities, but at the same time, once you do cuts of budget in the municipalities, the impact to service delivery at that level. So what is it that I think should be, that balancing act, because we can't keep on accepting the reality of municipalities that we are seeing. And actually, I know at one hand in our province, one of the discussions we've been having, including with the HE and in the SCOPA ourselves, is actually where, even when we see clean audits, is the level of service delivery, because at this point we still have not moved to the service delivery or the performance assessment in that regard. So I think for me is that issue of that particular balance of fiscal health of municipalities. What needs to be done is the work that is focusing, especially at this point, of all these fiscal problems in the municipal books, so that we can sit and be talking about this year in and year out, and expect, whilst I agree fully with the fact that maybe funds must go where people are, but when those funds get there and the environment to spend or the environment to manage those funds is not good, you are then in a catch-22 situation. So how do we resolve that particular catch-22 situation? The other question to the FFC for me, Chair, is around, I'm not sure what is their view in what is contained in the recovery plan around what is termed a localized product value chain approach. Because one of the critical problems that we are seeing about just the localization policy itself is that, and I want to speak just from a community point of view. Recently, for a week, we've been in an oversight on energy security in George and Mossel Bay. One of the things we're seeing there in the big infrastructure with the total gas and the gas exploration in Mossel Bay, is the fact that host communities continue to cry about, the beneficiation at local level, whether it's enterprises at those communities, whether it's jobs for those in those local communities. The issue of the localization policy continue to be very evasive and not clear in terms of definition around exactly the outcome, which is that localized product value chain. So at this point, whilst you talk about that approach, is our regulatory, is our policy environment, is our monitoring and evaluation capability tuned, to realize, the outcome that we are seeking. And I think that is my worry around this. And my last one, Chair, is around the issue of budgets for women, youth, and people with disabilities. And I think the cuts there and also the contributions, I think, to the SAA and maybe aligned with what a member, Honorable Njadu, raised about what is the criteria of these particular budget cuts. Because I think, once again, if we look at your income inequalities or inequality in general and index in South Africa, we're always talking about, these vulnerable groups continue, to be vulnerable. And the question for me is whether the extent of these instruments or institutions that are supposed to coordinate and ensure monitoring of the deliverables towards these particular sectors, if we keep on seeing them underfunded, undercapacitated, and continuously, when we talk about budget cuts, I mean, small as they are, to oversee their cross-cutting mandate, you still are sitting with a situation where, you see budget cuts in that regard. So I think it's also another area of concern, for me, in as far as the issues of women, youth, and people with disabilities. And when I see those departments and institutions that are supposed to actually help government to realize inclusive, development and inclusive growth, which is of the benefit of these groups. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Comrade Nomi. I see the work of Professor or Dr. Van Heerden and Dr. Sarakinski from VETS. It's showing itself.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Honorable Shenge.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson Mahlangu. Good day, honorable members. Let me thank FFC led by Commissioner Sachs and the PPO led by Dr. Nelia for the presentations. Let me start by saying I think we all agree that the cuts are impacting negatively from wherever they are being taken from whatever department that was. So I think that's an accepted truth. But what I find not coming out from the presentations is that faced with the economic situation that we're having, faced with the fiscal cliff that we're facing, what should be done? For instance, if you don't reduce there, what must you do? I think in both presentations, we need to start looking at that. For instance, where you may be saying, no, please don't cut the police, but go and cut there. And then we say, why should we do that? Because I think the problem statement, irrespective of how it's being put, we all agree that whenever you reduce a budget somewhere, you are creating a little bit of a problem. But what must be done when we are faced with the high levels of indebtedness in our country, high debt service costs, and so on and so forth, the fiscal framework issues and the macroeconomic issues that we talk about. The question, what should be done? That's one. Two, which I think generally even when we discuss this issue, without saying it, I think we have reduced our problems to money. Our failure to deliver on certain things, we seem to most of the time say it's because of money. I think we need to go deeper on the things, especially when you see departments with the rollovers, when you see departments underspending. So it says there's a bigger problem, bigger than money, so to speak. And I would like to say both FFC and PBO, if they could start also focusing on those things, because we inadvertently we create an impression that our problems are money problems. It's one of the it's one of the explanatory variables in the problems that we're having. But I guess there are many other variables in this equation which you must look at, including the capacity of the state and what should be done to try and improve and augment the capacity of for instance, the civil servants to spend this money and to spend it wisely and fruitfully. I think that's that. Another thing that is not coming out from the presentations, we'll all be saying that reducing money from here and taking it to the SOCs, it's not a good thing. Let's agree. But what we don't hear is that let that argument be taken to its logical conclusion. What must happen to those SOEs that we are bailing out? If you say we must close it, let's say that they close it, and please talk about the implications of doing that. For instance, there's there are bailouts or recapitalization of Eskom, which we've been doing. This recapitalization of SAA, and then I'm sure we'll soon be looking at the net and so on and so forth. But let's say what should be done, and then say what are the implications of that decision if that's the decision that we're taking. I thought let me put those things up front, and I would like just to hear the comments from both FFC and PBO. To FFC, you spoke about three things which must be done to resolve the fiscal challenges or crises at local government. Amongst them, for instance, the reduction of obligations from local government, the shifting of resources from national and provincial, and the raising of taxes. I think there's one big thing that we all miss. That these problems, where they emanate from, is from an economy which is not growing. So I think, for instance, if you look at the local government itself, they should also be concerned about what must they do to try and increase economic growth in their municipalities, what they can do to do that. Because the responsibility of increasing economy shouldn't be left only to some national departments. It's a responsibility of everyone. So the challenge that, for instance, I'll give, say, in this local government, for instance, if we say a Tegwin, what is it that we must do to try and increase economic growth so that we're in a position to increase these other things, to increase employment there, to be able even to get more rates, to be able to get more revenues, so to speak. So I think that's lacking. That all spheres of government, the problem is that the cake that we are busy dividing is not growing, is shrinking. So everybody, every level of government, every department should be seized with the responsibility of saying, what is my contribution to economic growth? What is it that I'm going to do differently as this sphere of government to make sure that there's better economic growth? For instance, if I were to go to local government again, the approvals, for instance, of business sites and other approvals, that there are a lot of administrative things which reside with the local government. Are those things, does it take 6 months? If it takes 6 months, what are you going to do to make sure that it takes 3 months or even lesser to make a certain approval so that a business can come to your locality and then you are able to generate some income from them? So those things, so I'm just saying that it's very important that we should, when we look at these challenges, we should go further than what is being divided from the national revenue. And I think Honorable Joseph did touch on this one, that when it comes to local government, I think I'm one of those people who say more resources should go to local government. We all say that it's a level of government which is closer to the people. But the thing is, can we go out and account for the money that has been given, right? If I've given you 5 rand this time, right? Do I solve the problem of local government by saying I'm giving you 7 rand? I think those of us who are here who wanted to come in and say, no, we've accounted for this money. For instance, we don't know if the AG's report is anything to go by, which we should. It means that most of the money at local government, it's not being properly accounted for. If you get a bad audit outcomes, it means the money is not being accounted for. So it's one area that, again, I think more focus should be based, should go on, so that we are able to say, what is it that can be done? So I'm trying to say, Honorable Chair, that some of our problems are not only money problems. Money is part of the problem, but let's look at these other things that we can do to try and improve the conditions or at different levels of government. FFC, the credit guarantee scheme, again, in these committees, we've been decrying the fact that until now, less than 10% of this credit guarantee scheme has been disbursed. But what we are not getting is that, and the implications are there for everybody to see, that the first reason why that money had to go out, that guarantee scheme was put, it was mainly to try and help businesses who were facing serious problems because of COVID-19 pandemic, right? So that we save those businesses, that's one. 2, needless to say, when you save businesses, you are also saving the jobs. When you are saving the jobs and businesses, you are also saving your revenue. So the impact of not drawing down and not getting that money, you saw, for instance, the applications and the approvals. But I think the main thing, let's be solution orientated. What must be done? What must be done differently? Because the president announced 200 billion rand credit guarantee scheme. But if by now only less than 10% has been disbursed, it means it's not getting the impact that it was supposed to. Now, the question, FFC, why are you saying that the burden of debt service costs are being pushed to provinces? If you could just talk to that. Government has come up with the district development model. A quick critique of that from your point of view. PPO, there are savings from unfilled posts that we spoke about. What do you think the impact, or what is the impact on service delivery of that? We shouldn't just be seeing it as service as savings. For instance, there are savings on school infrastructure. Do we understand the impact of that broadly? There's a lot of service delivery first and foremost, but again, if infrastructure is an area that has been identified as an area that we want to focus on to try and reignite the economy. The PBO, again, Presidential Employment Initiative, there's money which is being shifted from the departments, and I take it that it's going to the president. Do you think we have got enough infrastructure to deal with this at president? I would like to hear you. Okay, this one is the criteria. Yeah, and lastly, PBO again, your comment on the impact of the reduction of local government conditional grants on service delivery, economic growth, and employment creation. Those will be my points, Honorable Chairperson. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson. And I really want to appreciate your questions. You really spoke like an economist. Honorable members, I think these questions that we are asking, or clarity-seeking questions that we are posing to FFC and PBO, we should not expect them to give us answers, specific answers why this has happened. Because the intention of having FFC and PBO is to seek advice, to empower us, so that when we engage with the treasury, we are more empowered. We understand, and we know which angle should we enter from. So just reminding members that we should not expect answers as if we were asking those questions based on the decisions that were taken by Treasury, but we expect PBO and FFC as strategic institutions to have analyzed the decisions and advise members and empower members. Most of the issues that I wanted to raise have been raised, and I'll just highlight a few, Chairperson, honorable members. I want to get into the presentation of FFC and PBO, both of them, and I want to know if both of them has done any studies or impact assessment for service delivery. I think Honorable Buthelezi Shenge also spoke to that issue. And I also want to know if this might be caused by budget reduction, including the 2.53 billion rands reduction in the provincial equitable share as part of the wage bill reduction. And the issue of the wage bill, we've been trying by all means as Finance Committee, as Appropriations Committee, or as Oversight Committee to avoid getting involved in it. And I have seen that today there's the wage negotiations, which is happening visual, and we just hope they will find each other. And if the answer is yes, that impact assessment has been done, can this be shared with the committee, as this will assist the committee or will assist us to make an informed recommendations to Treasury when we meet with Treasury? Because we need to make recommendations or try to lobby Treasury based on facts, and we rely on you. If you have done that impact assessment, please share it with the committee members. On slide number 13 of the PBO, but the question will be for both PBO and FFC. In terms of seeking an advice as to how will the 25.3 billion rands budget from the provincial equitable share as part of the wage bill reduction affect the fight against COVID. So these two questions are interlinked with the first question that I had, the impact assessment. I'm still speaking to the 25.3 billion rands. So I want to know the relation between that and the effect that it will have in terms of the fight against COVID-19, especially in the most rural provinces where I am. Still difficult to attract, where we are still finding it difficult to attract scarce skills or well-experienced personnel. So it's a serious problem, and I think previously the government has tried to come up with a strategy of rural allowance so that we can be able to accommodate or attract those scarce skills. But we are still experiencing that, even if the government try to recruit or give an opportunity to members of the community, the young people coming from the rural area. When they are qualified, they will prefer to go and work in the urban or semi-urban areas. So it's a challenge that will need us to, or will need you to assist us so that we can better advise the Treasury Department. The other thing that I wanted to ask about is the legality, the legality of the double budget adjustment in a single financial year. According to section 43 subsection 2 of the Public Finance Management Act, requires that an amount of a saving under the main division of a vote that may be utilized in terms of subsection 1 may not exceed 8% of the amount appropriated, with a clear understanding of the COVID-19 pandemic crisis, which compelled government to all for a supplementary budget 2020, and we are now dealing with the second adjustment budget 2020. For both institutions that has made submissions, FFC and PBO, what is the total impact of these two adjustments in accordance with the requirement of section 43 that I mentioned above of the Public Finance Management Act and other legislative requirements? So I just want to understand the legality in terms of what we are doing. Hence, I said we expect you to understand and have analyzed these issues and be able be in a better space to advise us. On slides 14, honorable members and PBO and FFC, that one is refers to the presentation by PBO. Given the fact that 42 million rands has been reduced from the National Health Insurance indirect conditional grant, according to the PBO, how is this going to affect the much needed implementation of the NHI program, which aims to provide for universal access to healthcare services? And how will you advise the committee in this regard? Because we all understand the importance of making sure that we implement the NHI and everybody is benefiting through this program of NHI or policy, because it has also brought some excitement in the community that the unfortunate situation that we find ourselves as a country and the world of the pandemic of the COVID-19 has made us realize that there are possibilities to fast track the implementation of the NHI. So if there are such a reduction, how can you best advise us? Also, the fact that the overall reduction has affected the provincial equitable share and most conditional grant. So both institutions, could you please advise us whether such reduction have taken into consideration the possibility of rising inflation in the medium-term period? The last but two questions that I'll leave the others. How does the PBO and FFC define a bailout package? I think of the SOEs referring to the 10.5 billion rands and the SAA, many members have spoken to it. I think you have noted that. And I'll go back to slide number 6 of the presentation by FFC. The Gauteng and KZN, they have lost more than 1 million jobs during economic lockdown. That is a fact. And more than 1.2 million people become economically inactive in a single quarter. What could the FFC recommend as measures to recover job losses in the short and medium term period, taking into consideration the recovery plan that the president has presented? And I know that there might be others who might make examples or want to add to this. I'm not saying that the advice can be implemented only in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal, but I'm highlighting them as the most affected in terms of job losses. Thank you, honorable members. Any other member who wants to raise anything else before I hand over to FFC? Is there no one?
There is no indication so far, Chairperson.
Okay, FFC, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to, of course, we have an abundance of questions. We don't have that much money, but we have many, many questions, and it will be impossible, let me say in advance, for us to do justice to all of them. But I wanted to ask, we have Commissioner Lawrence here, Erasmus, and we have Commissioner Elsaby Rockman, and we did have Commissioner Trevor Fowler, who would have been excellent on the local government questions, but he did apologize. He had to go to another meeting, and we have Commissioner Aubrey Mokade, who is here but having challenges with connections. So I wanted to ask Commissioner Erasmus to start us off, looking at some of the issues that have been raised, particularly on the local government equitable share. So over to you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner Sachs. And
sorry, Lawrence. I just, before proceeding, wanted to clarify something. It's very important. I'm not a doctor. If you want to call me something, you can call me Mr. Or even Michael is even better. Or you can swear at me, but don't call me a doctor, please.
Can you also confirm the pronunciation of your surname?
My surname is spelled like a sack of potatoes. It's Sachs.
You pronounce it.
Don't get it wrong, please.
How do you pronounce it?
Saying like a sack of potatoes, Sachs.
Okay. I had Honorable Buthelezi and others pronouncing it otherwise. Thank you. Thank you so much. Commissioner Erasmus.
Thank you, Commissioner Sachs and Chair. I'd like to respond to Honorable Njabu about the the definition of a bailout, and it's basically an allocation from the annual budget to assist with SOEs that are in financial distress, which would be relative to a government guarantee that becomes a contingent liability, which of course then is not immediately, against available funds, but could possibly in future become so. Honorable Joseph and Buthelezi talked about the basically throwing good money after bad money in the plea to increase the allocations, the local government equitable share. But at the end of the day, we can never forget that there's a mandate to deliver services to the poorest of our people. And even though we all recognize that governance problems do exist, that capacity problems do exist, that money is not being spent efficiently and effectively, it does not take away the obligation to look after the poorest of the poor. So in the end, it should be a dual exercise. Certainly, attention should be given to governance issues that needs to be improved, efficiency and effectiveness of operations, value for money spending, but then simultaneously money needs to be made available to ensure that we do deliver on the mandate and that the people get the services that they need to survive. Then Honorable Buthelezi talked about the FFC that needs to provide solutions to issues that are being raised at these committee meetings. And I just want to assure all the honorable members that the FFC is certainly aware of this. We are looking into it, and we are currently giving attention within the structures of the FFC to rectify exactly what Honorable Buthelezi has been alluded to. So thank you, that's from me.
Okay, I wanted to ask our head of research, Dr. Khululi Ncube, to start us off in answering some of the other questions. I'll come back myself to the issue of provincial and local government and some of the issues raised by Honorable Karim and several others, Honorable Joseph and Honorable Moletsani. But let me ask Khululi to come in, and there were a wide range of questions that maybe others in the research team also need to add on. The recovery plan, the localized product value chains, the issues around monitoring and performance and budgeting related to that, the issue of the mass employment program announced by President and where that features in the budget, the issue of infrastructure raised very strongly by Honorable Dechale and Kaiso. So I think, yeah, if you could address some of those questions, please.
Thank you, Commissioner and honorable members, for the valuable questions. Some of them, I guess, we'll go back and do some bit of research to get answers to your questions. Let me answer some few questions. There was the first question about doing away with provinces. I would like to look at that question differently. I think as FFC, what we have argued is that there is actually a need to reorganize state machinery so that state machinery becomes responsive, efficient, and effective, and even build capacity to deliver on services. So it's a bigger issue than really looking at provinces. We have not said do away with provinces or what, but we have pronounced about reorganizing the state machinery so that it becomes sharp, it becomes responsive, and efficiently. And even if we look at SOEs, some people are talking about whether we should close some of them, or look at the numbers of SOEs. So it's important just to look at the state machinery, whether it is delivering what it is supposed to, and reorganization of the state to have a capable state is very, very important in that particular light. There were a number of questions about reductions and concerns about cuts in conditional grants in PS and LES. So FFC is also concerned about such cuts, because especially in 2021, because most of these cuts are really hitting hard vulnerable groups, which this vulnerable group cannot say no. If you look at the cuts in the LES, I think it's really a concern, and especially the shift from consumption expenditure to capital expenditure. We know that we need capital expenditure, but some of these shifts, if, for example, from the PS, they are hitting hard on water resources, which I think they affect the vulnerable people more. So that's the concern. So I think the question was about the criteria, what criteria really about these particular cuts. We see that there is really some shift towards capital spending from consumption, but the criteria is not clear in certain areas. And because it's not clear, even it may have some impact on service delivery and on economic growth if the criteria is less, I think, principled. We need something which is really criteria which is clear and which may not have some adverse effects. If we look at, for example, cuts in education, which we have seen that, for example, next year, allocations to basic education may grow by 0%. And we know that education is very key to economic growth or economic recovery. We need skills. So such cuts may, in the long run, really affect not only service delivery now, but it will affect economic growth in the long run. But we have not really assessed the impact on service delivery of these cuts. I think that was one of the questions which was asked. Have you assessed? The answer is we have really not done a thorough and rigorous study of what is the impact of these cuts. But we see these repeated cuts, especially on conditional grants, that in the long run, they may affect service delivery and actually the economic recovery program. There was also the issue about, on one of our slides, about reigniting the economy, that we plan to engage with ministers, and that, yeah, I think more important to that particular question is that when we come up with these particular plans, these plans must be very consultative. It must, or the people on the ground must be consulted. So I think that is what is coming out of this particular question. And we agree with that, that some of these plans, there's a need to consult broadly so that there's buy-in and there's ownership of such plans, and implementation will actually be easier. So we agree with that particular sentiment. Then there was the question from Honorable Karim about the impact of these cuts on service delivery. I would like to go back to that particular question and say, especially in the local government, we have seen these repeated cuts. Now, what has been really unprecedented is cuts in real terms on the local government equitable share. I think that is a concern. But looking at all these cuts over time, as one of our graphs shows, that these cuts on conditional grants have been repeated. Now we shall have some cuts on the LES, especially next year. So FFC has argued that there's really a need now, more than ever before, really to revisit the local government fiscal framework, and also look at all the assumptions which were said in the white paper some 25 years ago. We need to relook at that now and relook at the local government fiscal framework entirely to see whether what goes into the local government, and considering that the local government is also raising its own revenues, can it fund the mandate of the local government vis-a-vis what other spheres are also the mandate of other spheres? So there's a need really to revisit the powers and functions. We agree with Honorable Karim on that one. And also, I think it's important that we can have a parliament-led process whereby we provide technical inputs to that. So it's an important process, and I think there's a need to revisit the local government fiscal framework. Then there was the other issue about, from one of our slides, that the debt burden has been, we're saying the debt burden has been pushed to the provincial government and local government. Yes, if you look at these cuts, we can see that these cuts with the time, especially next year in 2021, they are severe on the provincial and local government spheres. So there is a particular shift that the fiscal consolidation process now is the burden of that particular process to stabilize the economy, to stabilize the debt. We see that that particular burden is being pushed to local government and provincial government in the form of these cuts which we see. Then there was also an issue about the reductions. Do they take into account inflation? If you look at some of our graphs there, we try to put most of the things in real terms to take into account the effect of inflation, and you can see how deep the cuts are if we are taking into account the inflation. In nominal terms, the cuts are very deep. If you look at local government, it's about 9% next year. But if you look at the inflation rate projected for that year is less than half of that. So in real terms, it means that the cuts will be very, very severe. So I'll leave it there for my colleagues. Eddie, I think there are some questions on the credit guarantee scheme, as well as, yeah, mainly the credit guarantee scheme. Eddie can allude to that. Then Chen can talk to the localization of the value chain issues. Thanks, Eddie. You can come in.
Thank you. The question about the credit guarantee scheme, what could have been done differently? I think here the main issue is really about the program design. When this instrument, the relief package were introduced, there was little emphasis placed on program design. So if you look at the approval rates of the credit guarantee, it was based on the assumptions that some of the business, the credit worthiness of the business is very high, but it turns out that most of our small businesses in the county, credit worthiness is very low, and as a result, they could not qualify for the credit. Now, the question is whether there's a need to relax conditions to qualify for the credit guarantee scheme, so that the scheme is not just does not necessarily use the strict banking, requirements, but also have some kind of a developmental approach in how businesses qualify for the credit guarantee scheme. So the main issue there is really about the program design from the beginning, which was inconsiderate of the fact that some of the small businesses, most of the small businesses in the country, are not credit worthy, and some of them, their financial records are really not up to date, and therefore it's very difficult for, if you're going to use the strict loan application processes of the banking sector for these businesses to qualify for the loan guarantee scheme. So the alternative is for the relaxation of the conditions, the requirements for business to qualify for the credit guarantee scheme, so that you also incorporate, if for where it's possible, you also incorporate a grant entitlements for some of the business. And then the question about the data availability, especially on the credit guarantee scheme, it's not really a national treasury problem here, but it's the absence of the information management system. So when you introduce a program introduce a new program, it should be accompanied by an information management system that will enable monitoring and evaluation of the performance of such a program. Now, the problem that we are experiencing is that there is no the timely information available in order for us to measure the impact of the relief package. So when the Commission made a presentation to the committee, I think to the same committee on the supplementary budget, there was a number of principles that we outlined linked to how a stimulus package or an economic relief package should be designed. One of which was that it really should be rapidly introduced into the economy. So in other words, the spending must be really very rapid so that you cushion the business against the possible impact of the lockdown. But without the information, the timely information, or as to whether that money is being released in the economy, it's very difficult to know whether it's making an impact or not. So I suppose the advice which the Commission can make here is that there needs to be, and government should be focusing on building information management system, credible information management system that would enable timely availability of information required to measure the performance of some of the spending programs. Thank you very much. Chen?
Yes, thank you, Chair, Honourable Chair, members. So just to emphasize the points about the local product value chain. So what it essentially means is that instead of growth as a sort of elusive term and not clearly sort of defined, think of I think what we're saying here is that we're suggesting that think in terms of how does a production takes place and what are the interdependencies to bring a product to market, all the way from, and this means from its point of origin in terms of its raw material to the intermediary or intermediate goods, and to the final, until finally delivered to the market for consumption. And then it's through that chain, that product value chain, and that all of that processes and inputs and outputs and inputs again, right? When it's an intermediate good and then into the output that's final, that all of those processes and all the labor inputs and all of that procedures and proper production processes must be localized. And so the word I think re-emphasize here is, and through the use of the product value chain, is to encourage the thinking and focus the attention onto those interdependencies. I think, and then just to add on to that, is that for the past decades, South Africa, we've been thinking or been flagging the terms, right, from export-led growth to the infrastructure-led growth, to even investment growth and so on and so forth. But if you look at those terms, what has happened was that I think the mistake we made through those decades was that we didn't think strategically in terms of what that meant. Take, for example, export-led growth. We started off saying, well, we will just grow by expanding exports. But without thinking the value chain processes of it, what happened, what we ended up was we exported a whole lot of our raw materials and resources, and then we imported a whole lot of the intermediates, meaning the machineries and the capital machineries that we needed to produce the final goods. And so that resulted in a lot of dependencies that is of import oriented. You see, so how that once at the time we were thinking very much into the export-led growth and so on, and in hopes that we would encourage inclusive growth. That unfortunately, due to that mistake, that one small mistake that we resulted in today, it's import dependent market and business model that we have today, including, if I may push it a little further, is that we remember there was also a time of human capital investment growth. So that we put a lot into education and health and so forth. And leading on to the employment question now, is that if you have a business model now that is, as we are facing, is one that is the labor force can't get into employment, right? So much so that throughout a couple of years, people become economically discouraged and therefore become inactive, economically inactive population. And so that those investments in a way on education and so forth becomes lost or costed, because we can educate and keep a person as healthy and as skilled as possible, but if he can't engage with the market, the economic opportunity is not there created in the markets for that person to engage with it, that's all that skills and health and all that is essentially lost because of that. The employability or the employment probability just can't get through that threshold to become employed and become a contributing and working member of the economy. And that is why this mass unemployment issue is so it's so significant. How do we resolve it? That's a very profound question, and I think which we'll have to do some more work on it as a commission. But one thing that I think as commission we can start noting and emphasize to the parliament, to this parliament, is the fact that we observe through our readings of the AG reports and through the understanding of how this government and the public sector works in South Africa, is that we note that there is a mass tender expansion, especially on part of the public sector services, that it seems like this government has not, in real terms, how has it delivered? And what are those processes, again, those interdependencies into delivering those services? It seems very much dependent on, again, procuring and paying someone else to do it in the market. Thank you, Chair.
I'm aware we're constrained by time, but okay. I wanted to quickly ask Sasha if she wanted to add anything, and then I wanted to ask Commissioner Rockman, who's also here, to make a comment, and then we will conclude. Sorry for taking your time, but it's your fault for asking so many questions.
Thanks, Commissioner Sachs. Perhaps just on the education infrastructure question, and just to indicate that we have recently done some analysis on access to education infrastructure. And whilst we see some slight improvements in access, it's not nearly enough. So we see, for example,
I'm sorry, I can't see you.
My apologies.
Okay, thank you.
So whilst we see good progress in, for example, the number of schools with access to electricity, we are lagging sorely behind when it comes to the issue of sanitation. So, for example, when you look at the Department of Basic Education's NEEMS data, you see that, for example, 16% of schools in South Africa still have pit latrines as the only source of ablutions. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done on ensuring not only access, but access to quality and safe infrastructure. And a big part of the challenge is the suboptimal management of infrastructure projects. This is a chronic problem that affects most sectors, not only the basic education sector, but hopefully now with all the mechanisms aimed at improving state capacity to manage capital projects, we'll see some kind of turnaround, especially if we are relying on infrastructure investment to promote growth. Thank you, Chair.
Commissioner Rockman can come on and address some of the issues around the division of revenue, please.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning, honourable members. I think I just have a few points that I wanted to raise. The issue of unfunded mandates, it's one of the areas of our research topics for the next submission on the annual division of revenue. Though we are looking at it in the context of COVID-19, it is a much broader question as well. Then I think the recapitalization of the land bank probably needs to be unpacked in far greater details, specifically in the context of what would be the impact to promote and broaden access of marginalized and emerging farmers to capital and financing. Because one of the members raised it to say it is really a concern that agriculture faces budget cuts now in the time of drought. But as an economic sector and the potential for economic growth, agriculture is probably a sector that should have been protected. We have not explored in detail the role of agriculture in local government to promote economic growth. And that is certainly an area of work that we should be looking at in far greater detail. The question was raised also about budget cuts that affects women, youth, children, people with disabilities. And it is a concern because those are vulnerable sectors. But equally, we do not raise the questions to the quite substantial cuts in the arts and culture sector. We need to think more clearly about the potential and impact of the creative economy in stimulating economic growth. And that is certainly an area that I would encourage the committee to further unpack as well. The request that we collaborate and re-look at the powers and functions of the three spheres of government, certainly that request, I'm sure the acting chairperson will be bringing to the commission, that we see how we collaborate further on that. The Budget Council Lekgotla this month will be looking at the local government framework, the fiscal framework, and we know that National Treasury, SALGA and COGTA have been doing a substantial body of work in that area, and that will be helpful to find a way also forward for us. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much. FFC, are you done?
Well, let me just conclude by adding a couple more comments and really responding to Honorable Moletsani and Joseph and Karim by saying that I think, in a sense, the answer to the way Honorable Moletsani posed the question did come out, that when we think of provinces, we must think of three functions: health, basic education, and housing. And it's not clear to me that, so those functions alone make up 80 or 90% of provincial budgets. And maybe we could add transport and roads. So it's not clear to me when we say abolish the middleman, With respect of health and education, we would then have to say, how do we deliver health and education in an entirely different way? And of course, some of those discussions are taking place in the context of NHI, but that's a huge question because as Honorable Joseph points out, there are 1 million public servants there in health and in education that are employed by provinces. And I'm not sure that there's a strong argument, say, for instance, on basic education, as to we should shift that function either to national to centralize it or to local to decentralize it. I think there's probably a stronger case on the issue of housing. And indeed, the National Development Plan and the policy, many expert commissions, including the FFC, have argued for a very long time that those municipalities that have the capacity should be delegated the budgets and the authority for dealing with public housing. And that has not taken place despite recommendations on that for many, many years. And I would then relate that to the way Honorable Karim posed the question, where he said, well, this issue has been noted and discussed for a decade, but nothing seems to be done because there hasn't been political will, was the word he used. And I think that's exactly the problem. It's not an issue of, we can certainly do, and I think we will do, and continue to engage on this issue in a technical sense, together with our partners in SALGA and National Treasury and DCOG. We'll do that. But really the issue is political. What are the choices that need to be made to resolve these problems, rather than the menu of options that we have? Many people have said these are the menu of options, these are the recommendations, say, for example, with respect to housing, but there has been no movement. So, and I would link that to Honorable Buthelezzi's, the way he posed his question to say, what is to be done? I think really the ball is in the court of Parliament and the executive to accelerate these conclusions. Because the reason, and Honorable Karim says, why do I think that something will happen now, whereas it hasn't happened for the last 10 years? And the answer is not so much that political conditions have changed such that there will be action, whereas in the past it was difficult to take action. The answer is that economic and fiscal conditions have changed so much that a continuation of the failure to take action will be felt increasingly acutely by the poor and those who depend on public services in the period going ahead. So we've had a chronic problem in medical terms, a debilitating problem of our lifestyle for the last decade and more. But now it is about to become acute. And that's why maybe this will jolt us into reassessing these conditions much more directly and with intent to act. And I will thank you and leave it there.
Thank you very much, Deputy Chair. I agree with you that we have had so much questions, and you selected some of the questions. I don't know if the ones that you have not responded to, you prefer to go and do more work on it and respond in writing. More especially on one of the questions that I've asked on the impact assessment that you have done, the study. Have you done it? If you have done it, can you share it with us? And I know that you cannot share it with us here if you have done it. But if you have not done it, you can see how to respond to it, because I think these decisions might have been informed by a research that you have done as you analyzed the MTBPS, these cards, the impact that they will have. So that question of mine was referring to that. But I think there's one thing that we have raised, the issue of the 10.5 million. I heard your response, but there's been a confusion as to what is this 10.5 million. Is it a bailout or is it a rescue fund? And I thought in your presentation or your response, you will help us to classify it, because as the committee that is responsible for the pairs of the country, of the taxpayers, we need to know what is this money meant for, so that we can better oversight it and do our work in terms of overseeing that there's value for money. The minister did confirm that is not a bailout, but from your point of view, how can you classify it? Other issues, I think they will come in writing, those that you were not able to respond to them. And I think it only gives me pleasure to see members coming with so many questions in the engagements. It's not a problem, because this is the meeting of the members, and members must have more time to engage with your presentations. Can you step off? What is your last comment, Deputy Chair?
So I just wanted to say, yes, indeed, we will look at the other questions that we haven't answered adequately, and we're happy to send you some written comments on those questions. I think the Dr. Ncube did allude to the question of impact assessment, but we can certainly add more there. And I mean, I think on the issue of whether it's a bailout or it's not a bailout, in a sense, we should avoid, that's not a classification in the budget, bailout. It is currently classified as transfers or purchase of financial assets. So it's regarded in the budget as a purchase of equity in SAA. And the question is that what it is? And I suppose the Department of Public Enterprises would need to tell us what is the bailout financing. Or sorry, I'm using that word again. What is the money financing is the important question, rather than do we call it this name or that name. I would think that would be my submission, but definitely we can add more in writing to some of the other questions.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Sachs. Sachs of Beck. I must not do that mistake.
The other one, it's Goldman Sachs. If you know Goldman Sachs, unfortunately, I'm not having shares there, but they do have my name in their company name.
Okay, thank you. PBO, over to you. Members, are you fine? Before I let PBO, Nelia to come in, are you fine with the responses from FFC?
Yes, Chair. I think let's allow PBO to come in. If we still, I think they'll still be in when PBO finishes. Before they are not leaving us. Yeah, I think let's allow PBO.
Okay. Nalias?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Chairperson. I'm not going to talk for half an hour because I also want to give my other colleagues an opportunity. But what I can say, and also almost in summary, is that for years, government is talking about efficiency and effectiveness and value for money. And all of these things, all these problems that we are sitting now is not just the economic situation and the pressures from the SOCs and the high COE. And these are basically, how do we run government business, or the business of government? So the COE problem, we can almost draw like a decision tree. So now we've got the economic growth problem. We don't collect enough revenue to cover all our expenses. But what caused all of this? What caused the SOCs to be in such a problem? Is it because the monitoring of the SOCs? Because one example that I can provide to you in terms of the SOCs and the monitoring of SOCs and how government managed the SOCs. At one stage, the South African, the SAA was under the National Treasury. Then it was moved to Transport, and then it was moved to public entities. So there's a lot of things that could have contributed to problems within these SOCs that provide the service for government, basically. In terms of the compensation of employees, our structure has just grown and grown and grown. We do have a problem of high increases, higher than inflation, but our structures are very, very big. And then another example is the high percentage of our budget that we transfer to other institutions to provide the services on behalf of government. We've been talking about that a lot. And lately, or within the budget guidelines, you can see that government is trying to reduce those transfers in terms of the smaller institutions. So that is something that we can implement to actually be more efficient and effective. And we also have this draft procurement bill. I've heard about tenders that takes more than 5 years to complete. And then when they are completed and they give out these tenders to people, they basically bought the wrong machinery. And then this machinery can't be used. They are stored in storerooms. So, Honorable Buthelezi, you actually also touched on this. It's basically how do we do the business and how do we monitor expenditure? And then the other thing, we are all very worried about the reduction in COEs. I can't talk on behalf of the provinces, but just what we've seen in this adjustments budget on how the national departments reduced their COEs. There's only one department, members, that actually used the savings on goods and services to cover for the reduction in their COE budget. All other departments, or most of them, still have vacant positions or additional funds in compensation of employees that they could transfer towards other items, especially for the leave gratuity. So you can see there are still COE money available within departments. Employment and Labour even surrendered some of their COE money. So there must be something wrong in terms of how we do our budgets, compile our budgets for the COE item. And then in terms of infrastructure, I basically indicated also that the tender processes that takes long, and then we buy the wrong machinery that we can't use. So there's a lot of wasted expenditure in infrastructure as well. And then also in terms of the conditional grants, in one of our additional slides, the only information that we could get was for the first quarter on the expenditure of provincial conditional grants. It's very slow, members. In terms of agriculture, for example, in the Eastern Cape or in Gauteng, it was 1.8% in the first quarter expenditure on agricultural conditional grants. But you can look at the information that we've got in the additional slides. On the school infrastructure, for example, there was a rollover of 475 million on school infrastructure backlog grant. So last year we just didn't spend the money. And these kind of things happen over and over and over again. If I can also go back to the COE budgets, for example, the magistrate salaries that has been reduced by 107 million. Every year we have a reduction in magistrates' salaries and judges' salaries that they can't spend. And I was also just thinking, if we didn't do all these reductions, what would the kind of declared unspent funds look like this year, especially in terms of the situation that we had with COVID? But I'm not going to spend any more time just in terms of the finances. I also want to give my colleagues an opportunity, because they also want to comment on the SAA and whether it's a bailout or not. Dumisani?
Thank you so much, Nelia. Good morning, honourable members. Good morning, colleagues. Just a quick points I want to touch on. Quite a few of them, but I see our time is quite, ahead of us. Just a few points I want to comment on. Just relates to the spheres of government, touched by quite a lot of honourable members, but also our colleagues from the FFC have raised the issues around that, commented around that. I think traditionally, Chairperson and honourable members, that you see that the two-tier system of governance has shown, I mean, there's countries, fewer countries which has three tiers of this system, where similar to South Africa. I think Brazil, Argentina, and Switzerland, some of the few countries which are similar to us. But I think when you look at the country's two-tier system, which is the central and local government, you realize that in terms of service delivery, it does outperform the three-tier system in terms of service delivery, largely because the concentration of skills, personnel, administrative capacity largely happens at the central level, but also at local level, but also the fact that there's huge power that the local government have in terms of being able to put policies and implement them, and also ensuring the quiet implementation of fiscal policy and fiscal reform. There's a sort of strong indication in that regard, because when you look at three-tier system, it's often challenges in terms of complexity within a system, which often falls a lot on the feet of the local government to deal with this complexity within the systems. And there's a very interesting literature that shows that actually you'd rather have a pure system. Of course, there are other complications around that system. I agree with Honorable Karim and our members that they probably need to have more conversation around how do you make the system as it is, the three-tier system, to be effective, and what some of the issues. And main issue is the issue of capacity, local government. A lot of capacity is sitting in provincial government, largely in terms of implementing the services. If there's a clear sense of ensuring that capacity also is translated back to local government, or there's a nice way of merging the two to make sure the service delivery is actually at the heart of the functioning of the system. But I think the conversation should also take into account that, again, when you look at in the literature as well, is that having the three-tier system is largely around trying to strengthen democracy and accountability in the system. So there's that also mechanism that also have to be taken into account in that regard. And I think I agree with honourable members. The point that we can't leave it as it is, as the commissioner from the FFC says, that it's worth having clear political will try to say how do we effectively ensure service delivery takes place at the local government as the main government system that's in the face of service delivery in that regard. I'll just leave it there, park it there on spheres of government. The second point is around state-owned entities. I think the issue of bailout or not bailout, I just want to answer it in this way. I think when you look at the issue of state-owned entities, of course, there's an issue. I mean, we've done a report a couple of years ago where we tried to show that the challenge with SOEs is that you have state-owned entities that have both commercial and developmental mandate, and mixing the two often creates a problem in terms of when does the funding becomes the commercial mandate, or when does the funding actually becomes just a bailout in that regard. When you look at that's a bigger challenge, and I think we've kept on saying this over the years, that we need to separate those two in both funding from operational and also infrastructure purposes. When the government funding goes there, it needs to be clear that this is related to a developmental mandate, and what does that even mean? And I think it's a very important point. Coming back to because I mean, government funding to state-owned entities is often done in two folds. The first part is try to address the commercial, the developmental mandate part of it, and the second part, as government being the only shareholder, it's around guaranteeing the debt taken on by the state entities. Now, when you look at the 10.5 billion, which I think on SO and at SAA, the Minister of Finance has indicated that it is not a bailout, it's an equity injection. I suppose it's a more equity injection, but again, it's very complex to completely say it's not a bailout or it's a bailout or it's an equity injection, because it has both element of the bailout and the equity injection, because there has to be debt that's been paid out, because if you don't pay out those debts, the entity will probably have to call on all other debts that has to be paid up by the entity. So it's complicating around this area. So the point I'm just saying that it has both the elements of the bailout and the equity injection. And I think what's important is both Minister of Finance, Minister of Trade, and Minister of Public Enterprise to provide that detailed explanation in that regard. The last point is around what we have been discussing in the office with the colleagues as well, the issue of a budget being a means as opposed to be seen as an end. I think the issue around, there's a big question here, which, it touched to some of the points raised by honorable members to say, what is the impact of service delivery of the reductions and so on. The question here is, what informs the budget? What really went in informing what amount to be allocated to which spheres or which department? And I think that's question, if you're not going to be able to answer that question in terms of, the discussion we had in the office 2 weeks ago was to say, look, we've argued earlier in February, in June, during the supplementary adjustment, say, look, the president has made announcements in terms of these are some of the things that needs to be done in terms of recovery. And we our analysis now are trying to look at the budget proposals. Let's try to link it back to say, what are some of the proposals that are directly linked to what has been announced? And of course, it's not as simple as we try to make it, but I think the big question, which for us, that question needs to be responded to by government. So look, what really informs the budget? Is it slightly to assume the budget itself is a means to an end, or it's an end itself? And I think the big question that, going forward, the government needs to respond to. The last point is the issue around impact of proposals. It's a point that we've been discussing, and we're going to take it on forward in our future analysis. So look, some of the proposals we need to really have a sense of in terms of how does it affect this delivery. And I think we've asked this before, the government has to provide the legislature with such indications. How will such reductions or proposals affect service delivery? Thank you so much, Chairperson. I'll just stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dumisani. Just one last thing that I forgot to say. Honorable Buthelezi also asked about the presidential initiatives. That money is not going to the Department of the President. It's already been allocated to all the different departments that will create these jobs for what it has been appropriated for. Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson. I don't think my other colleagues also want to respond. So I don't know, Rashad, do you want to say something about SAA?
No, I think I'm largely covered, except for that the MTBPS does note that 6.5 billion is essentially for guaranteed debt and interest. And the additional 10.5 billion, as noted in the MTBPS, is to implement the business rescue plans. That's all the detail we have in the MTBPS. Thank you.
Honorable Chairperson, that will then conclude our feedback. Thank you.
Oh, I was muted. Sorry about that. Thank you, Team FFC, Team PBO. Thank you very much for your responses. And I think for those responses that you could not promptly give answers to or advices to, actually, because we were looking for advices, you can further communicate with the Secretariat of both the Select and Stand Committee on the advices. I'm going to allow Honorable Co-Chairperson, Chairperson of the Standing Committee, Ushenge, if he wants to say something before I close the meeting.
Thank you so much to you, Chairperson. Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you for leading us today. I think with a good engagement. Just my closing comments. Both PBO and FFC, some of the things that we raised were very much cognizant of the fact that you may not be having the answers there and there. It's more about giving you part course provision, something to work on, because these are the things which are perhaps troubling us. So I think that's one principal comment that I would have loved to make. And then two, I know that most of, or let me say some of the commissioners at FFC are non-executive. Perhaps we end up dishing a lot of things to FFC. I would like at one stage to understand the organogram of FFC and the human capital capacity to deal with all these things, that because we may find that we keep on dishing out this expectation, or to find out that the organogram, or perhaps people who are there, we don't have enough people. But that won't stop us from giving you more of these things. I can see that the leadership of FFC and PPO, they've worked with us politicians for a long time. One of the things that I posed, I said, come to the conclusion. What are we saying about these SOCs? We were very good in identifying problems, but we never come to the conclusion. And I'm sure you as technical people, you shouldn't be afraid to say that. Nobody will take you to task. We know that you are independent people, and you are giving us your scientific appraisal of the issues. But yeah, thank you so much, Chair. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Team PBO and FFC.
Thank you very much, Shenge. I think FFC, if you can also send the organogram that Honorable Buthelezi is talking about. We are going to have a congested and marathon of meetings, congested schedule. We might not be able to have that luxury of time to have a meeting specifically to speak about that. But you can send us your organogram, and the organogram will be talking about the present. If you say you have vacant posts, we want to see funded vacant posts. If that post is not funded, it's not vacant. It needs to be clear. We don't want to see your wish or your dream in terms of your organogram. So we'll appreciate if you can get that beforehand, so that when we meet, or we can even try to talk about it even in your absence, and analyze it, or give it to our learned support staff to analyze it, and give our political input into that, and give it back to you. Thank you very much, honorable members, for your participation and your presence. It's now 8 minutes past 12. We were planning to finish at 12. And thank you for the sacrifice that you have made. And please pass the message of thank you to your leadership that allowed you to be in this meeting, very important meeting, and not be at the ground. And well wishes to all participants in the local government elections. Let the most favored or the best team win. Where's Karim? Honorable Karim, I think you are best here. Are you still on the ground, or Usem Kungundlov? He's gone. Thank you, Shenge. Thank you very much. Thank you, honorable members.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah,
we thank you, Chair.
Thank you very
Very
much.
nice.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nkosi kufanele uvale.
Thank you, Chair.
I-ground liyahamba. Thank you so much.
Baba yini kaloko.
Bye bye.
I-ground liyahamba.
Sizayi-revolutionize le ndaba.
Honorable Mkiva, how are you, sir?
I'm fine, comrade. How are you?
Sandy Kombul.
Yeah, ngiyakukhumbula, comrade. You are on the ground in the campaign.
Yes.
Uyabonakala.
We've got 4 by-elections.
Uyabonakala, comrade, lapho ukuthi uyibambile.
Siyasebenza kaloku.
Ngibona kwayithwala yakho enhloko ukuthi unguvuka ibambe.
No, it's nice to see you.
No, good to see you too, comrade.
Ciao.
Lovely, lovely. Kodwa wasilahla kwi-contralesa, comrade Priscilla.
No, I'm still there.
Oh, usayibambile lapho.
I'm still there. I just reduced my activism. But
Oh,
I'm
I
still
see.
there.
No, wonderful. All the best that side. Bring it on and make sure that we win all those vacancies there.
Definitely, definitely.
Yeah. Okay, comrade.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye.